It's been said that the two most important days of a person's life are the day they're born and the day they figure out why. Hi, I'm Jimmy Lakey, the host of the Critical Mission podcast. I figured out what my why was. I thought early on I might be a politician. Maybe I'd be a pastor. Maybe I'd be a preacher. I started a music company. I host a radio show. But my why, it was all discovered on the streets of Africa, in Rwanda, when I met a little child that I adopted and decided I'm going to take care of widows and orphans in Africa. My organization, my why is riverspromise.org. What's your why? What about my guest? What's their why? We tell the story of people's why right here on the Critical Mission Podcast. Hey, it's Jimmy Lakey with the Critical Mission Podcast. We started the Critical Mission Podcast to tell stories, the story of people's lives and how they can make a difference. It was based on the quote that no one really knows who said it. They used to say Mark Twain said it, but there's no evidence of that the two most important days of a person's life are the day they're born and the day they figure out why. I figured out my why, and you hear in the intro, I figured it out on the streets of Africa after adopting a little boy. So if we want to tell stories, we've had so many great guests tell their story. Let me tell you my story for those of you who don't know it. In 2007, I went to Africa for the first time, leading a missions trip for a local church of college kids. Leading up to that, decided that we talked about adoption, always adopting a child, and I said this would be a good time to start. Fast forward, I started the process and saw a photo of a little boy that was sent to me by, who's now my field director in Rwanda for Rivers Promise. Sent me a photo of a little boy, and the moment I saw the photo, I said, that's my son. Of all the photos he sent me, that was the only photo where the child wasn't looking at the camera, wasn't smiling. Matter of fact, he had just woken up from a nap, had his finger in his mouth, and was crying, mad that he had to pose for a photo. The moment I saw that, I said, that is my son, and the process of adoption began. By the time we went there in 2007, hoping to leave that mission trip and come home with my son, we hit a roadblock, an obstacle. All the work had been done. Every facet of government had been made and gotten through, except we needed one signature, and that signature was on hold. In Rwanda, they didn't recognize agencies. This was a totally private adoption. They didn't have any agency in America that you could just go and pay them to do all the paperwork. We had to do the paperwork in America here. We had to do it in Rwanda. It was all private adoption, hiring attorneys in Rwanda to try to push through the process. Well, that signature didn't come. 2007. Came back to the United States without my son. Had a room set up at the house for him. Little bunk bed, furniture, everything was ready for a 3-year-old, but he was still in Rwanda and I was here. While I was in Rwanda at the orphanage where my son was at, I asked the bishop that oversaw the church where the orphanage was at, I said, what's your greatest need? What is your biggest need here? And the bishop said, I thought he was going to say maybe food. I thought he was going to say a bag of beans and some rice and we'll be good. And he looked at me square in the face and square in the eyes, and his name was Bishop Safari, Pastor Safari. He said, our greatest need is education. He says, the kids don't wear great clothes, but they're clothed. He said, the kids don't eat a lot, but we do feed them to the best of our ability. He says, the only way they'll break out of here, and the only way they'll ever be successful, is to get an education. And he says, we don't have the money to give school fees or pay the school fees at the local schools. So I said, well, I'll see if I can help with that. Came back to America without my son, but decided, maybe I should do something about it. So I called it Jimmy's Orphan Project. And I decided that I would start helping out just on my own, paying the school fees of children that were at the orphanage. Going to pay the school fees, and other people found out about it and said, we'll contribute to that. We'll contribute to that. And suddenly we had Jimmy's Orphan Project, had several people contributing to help pay the school fees for about 50 or 60 kids that were at an orphanage. Probably 30 or 40 of those were school age, and we were all pitching in to try our best to help. One of my friends said, you can't call it Jimmy's Orphan Project. That doesn't really have any brand recognition. I said, well, I didn't expect it to have brand recognition. It was just my personal labor of love. And he says, why are you doing it? And I said, I'm doing it because I never want my son, because I had photos of me holding him for the first time. I never want my son, when he gets here, to look at a photo and say, what happened to those other kids? And I never wanted to have to look and say, they were your earliest friends, but I have no clue. I don't know what happened to them. We got the heck out of the country, and here you are in America. God bless America. I didn't want that. I wanted to be able to look back at the photos of his childhood, his early days in an orphanage, and say, I know that kid. We fed that kid. We sent that kid to school. So he said, so this is for my friend said, this is for your son. I said, yep, this is for my son. He said, your son's name is River. You're making a promise. I said, I think we have a name, River's Promise. And that was the birth of River's Promise. It was the promise that was made to my son before he ever got to America. He was still in an orphanage in Rwanda. And the truth be told, I had no guarantees that he was ever going to leave that orphanage. Fast forward now to 2008. We've been about 9-10 months without my son here, working with lawyers, having people in Rwanda every day try to get the one access to the lady who needs to sign the one piece of paper. That's all we needed. And no signature, no response, no reason. Send people on a runaround. We need one more document. They'd go get a document, bring it back. Oh, we need another document. That's not the right one. It was just nonstop swirling and twirling to get the final signature for this little boy to leave Rwanda and be adopted here in America. It wasn't happening. So I knew we had a crossroad here. I knew that in Rwanda, he was actually technically now my son. The adoption had cleared there. The signature was allowing him to leave there and be adopted also in America. And I said, well, I'll go over there and deliver some school fees because the school season was about to start again. And I said, I'm going to deliver some school fees. We'll have a big ceremony. We will present school supplies to the kids, and it'll be just a good interaction with the kids. And it'll also let me see my son. And I can also then face-to-face try to get this one signature that we needed. And we were struggling with it. So I went to Rwanda again in August of 2008. I went there again by myself, kind of an open-ended ticket, planned to spend maybe a week or two, was flexible to spend more because I needed to do one of two things. I needed to leave there with my son, or I needed to somehow unadopt him because technically he was mine. They said you can just live in Rwanda for a few years, and then after that you automatically be able to take him out of the country. And living in Rwanda a few years at that point was not really on my to-do list. It wasn't on my bucket. It wasn't possible. So I go to Rwanda 2008, and every day we go to this one government office. It was the Ministry of Gender, I think is what it was called, the Minister of Gender. It was a cabinet-level officer. We could not get access to this lady. She had a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper's name was, in Rwanda, they call it Veronica. And we still make jokes about when we have difficulties with a charity, we say, is Veronica involved? Because we must have hit a roadblock. Veronica would not give us access. She was this gatekeeper. She literally sat outside the door as the administrative assistant or the secretary, if you will, not letting us to the secretary in the cabinet. And every day I would show up there. Now that I was back there in 2008 and I would like to request a meeting, she would say, let me give you the phone number, take your phone number, and we will call you if something opens up. I would go the next day. I'd like to request a meeting. And she would say, the minister is not in today. She is out in the countryside. Every day I went. Finally, I decided after 2 or 3 days of this, I decided I was going to have my own little protest, a sit-in, if you will. So one day after 3 or 4, maybe 5 days of being there, I walk in and she looked at me and I said, I'm here for my appointment with the minister. And I sat down in her office. It's kind of like sitting down in a dentist office. There was a magazine rack that had like highlight magazines or something like a dentist, and I could do crossword puzzles. And I sat there, and I sat there, and I sat there. And for the next few days, every day I would go in and sit there. She said, the minister cannot see you. I said, I will wait for my turn. And I would just sit there. And sometimes I would sit there for an hour. Sometimes I would sit there for 2 hours. Sometimes I'd just sit there for 3 hours. And she would stare at me, and I would just smile at her and say, I'm waiting for my appointment still. She never threw me out. I thought that was coming. Sometimes I'd sit there for 2 or 3 hours because my contacts in Rwanda said, we have to run some errands. We will drop you off and come pick you up later. And they would go for 2 or 3 hours and run around and do whatever they wanted to do. And I'm still sitting in this one government office waiting for an appointment. There was a hotel not far that after one afternoon of waiting, I said, let's stop off and let's have some lunch and get something to drink. A Coca-Cola. They all like Coca-Cola or Fanta. Everybody wants a Fanta. So we pulled up to this hotel, and as I was walking in, a gentleman was walking out of the same restaurant bar patio area that I recognized. He was a man that I had met back in 2007. He was Dr. Charles Miragandi. And Dr. Miragandi, the meekest, mildest, nicest fellow that you could ever imagine. And he recognized me because not many Mzungus or white people at 2007, 2008 were circulating around in Rwanda. And he recognized me and he said, "How are you?" And I introduced myself again. And I said, "I'm having a difficulty." And he said, "How can I help you?" And he was equivalent to what we would call Secretary of State. He was like third highest in the government. You know, he was in the line of succession. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, I think was his official title. But at the time George W. Bush was president, his equal was Condoleezza Rice. So that lets you know kind of how high up in the government he was. So I told him, I said, "I'm trying to adopt this boy, and I can't seem to get any progress with the minister." And he says, "I think she has been out of the town." I said, "I've told that, but I still need a meeting. I need her signature." And he says, "Let me see if I can help you." And he says, "I don't know if I can, but I will try." And I said, "Okay." Earlier that day, before I met Dr. Miragandi that morning, I had been to the orphanage. It was called the PEFA orphanage. I had been there and we did our very first presentation of school supplies. Great photos of me handing out school supplies, crayons, pencils, notebooks to kids, and these kids are now going to get to go to school. And so I'm handing out the school supplies, and the national television stations are there because, again, 2006, 2007, 2008, not a lot of white guys were handing out school supplies up at some random orphanage in the Gikondo section of Kigali, Rwanda. It was pretty unusual. So I have their equivalent to CNN or their equivalent to Fox News. They're covering me this presentation. I figure I'm going to make the news that night. Well, I'll tell you what happened the next day, but I should have known that it was going to be good. A little out of order, but go back to the school presentation. Go back to me handing out the school supplies. I've been praying a little bit and having some big conversations with the big guy upstairs. I'm like, "God, I want to adopt this kid. I need to get this thing done. I don't know how to do it. I've knocked on the door. I've protested. I've sat in a huff. I've waited. I've stared at this Veronica lady. I'm not having any kind of help. I really could use some help because I don't know if I need to stay here another week, another month. I don't know what to do. I need to meet the right person. Could you give me a sign? Could you, I don't know, write it on the wall or something or flash it in the sky. Could you give me a sign?" So right before I met Dr. Miragandi, I was handing out the school supplies. And in walks my son, who's not school age at the time, but they brought the little kids in from the orphanage to be a part of the fun and hand out. So we handed in some crayons and some books. And I look down and I see my son, River, who has no clue that I'm adopting him. No one in the room except my one friend knew, and the bishop knew that we were in the process of adoption. It was a total secret because they did not want a child to be ostracized for that or any. They just didn't want to get somebody's hopes up. It was all very quiet. No one knew that I was in the adoption process. So I'm looking after praying and just trying to figure out what the heck is going on. I need a sign of some kind. I need to meet the right person. I need some kind of a sign. I look at my son and I didn't recognize the shirt that he was wearing. And I thought, And the reason that may sound weird to you, it's an orphanage. Any child of a certain size swaps around the same shirt. They do the laundry and they just hand them out. No one has their own shirt. No one has their own possession. The only thing when my son left the orphanage he had were a pair of flip-flops. Those were his. Their shoes were yours. But the clothes were communal, and if they fit you, you wore them. And so what you saw one boy in one day, the other boy may be wearing the next day after laundry because their clothes were not yours. It was just a communal clothing pile. And there weren't many clothes. Usually it was a dark blue shirt with a little number, cute little thing, and it's a pair of blue shorts and the flip-flops. Well, I look, and there's a light blue shirt on this kid, who's my son. He's sitting next to another child and two children. I have the photo hanging at the entry of my house. And I'm looking, and I get closer, and I'm not supposed to show any signs that I'm any favoritism. They warn me, don't show any favoritism. We know River's going to be there, but you can't play favorites. You can't. That would cause problems for him, and it's just not fair. So I did my best to not play favorites, but I get close to them and I'm saying hi to the little guys, the little kids that have come to this school presentation with the television cameras and the lights are everywhere. And I look at the kid's shirt, and it's a shirt that I had never seen in that orphanage before. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you, I never saw it again. And what's interesting is we never brought clothes. We never brought shoes. We bought everything there. It was not like I was traveling there with a bag of hand-me-downs. Nothing. We're out on a rural road with potholes outside of Kigali in an area called Gikondo. It's not like there's a gift shop that has this kind of shirt there. There's no way they're even selling it there. We don't know where he got the shirt. I'd been praying, God, I kind of could use a sign. I need to meet the right person. I need a sign to know this is going to happen. So I zoom in and look at his shirt, and his shirt says, it has pictures of some animals and a little mountain, I believe, and it says right across the top, Colorado. Now, I'm kind of beat down. I've been staring at Veronica every day. I'm tired. I'm trying to make decisions about when do I go home? Is this going to happen? And I'm kind of stunned that his shirt says Colorado. And matter of fact, I'm really stunned. So I turned to my friend Willie, who works with us there and has helped facilitate a lot of the process of adoption. I said, Willie, do you think that's a sign from God? And he looked at me and started laughing, and he says, you are not a very smart Mzungu. You're not very smart Mzungu. That means white guy. And he says, of course it is. And I said, okay. So we leave the orphanage, and I'm like, well, the kid has a T-shirt. Don't know where he got it. I'll take it as a sign. Maybe we're headed in the right direction. So I go to bed, not knowing what the day. I didn't know if the next day was going to get better. I still didn't know how long I was going to stay. This was also a time your mind there weren't really nice hotels at the time. I'm in a guest house. There's no air conditioning. You sleeping under a mosquito net. There's no breeze. It's not comfortable. It's just not real comfortable. And you're wishing for the comforts of home. You're hoping for some air conditioning. It was even the day that there were very few places you would have to go to a computer cafe to access Wi-Fi or internet. So it's not as if you could sit around in this guest house and read an ebook. It's not like you could check your emails. It's not like you could go down to the restaurant. It was pretty primitive compared to now in Rwanda. And so it was kind of miserable at night. So I have this great day, and I'm just trying to fall asleep and maybe do a little reading because no television, no Wi-Fi, no anything. And I fall asleep, and I wake up the next morning thinking we're going to rinse and repeat. We're going to do it again. Take me back to the minister's office, Minister of Gender. I'm going to go stare down Veronica. And I walk in and I said, I'm here to see the minister. I'm here for my appointment. And I sit down, and Veronica looks at me, and she called me to the desk. She says, come. And I go to her desk and she says, the minister will see you in a few minutes. I'm stunned. I don't know what to do. I was not expecting that. The minister will see you in a few minutes. Well, let's see how this goes. I sit down. Veronica stares at me. I stare at her. I don't think she wanted this meeting to happen. I have a feeling, my speculation is that night Dr. Miragande probably forgot about me. But I'm thinking that night or that morning he saw the newscast. And there's this white dude handing out stuff to children, handing out school supplies on the national news. And I have a feeling, maybe I'm wrong, Dr. Miragande looked and said, oh, I need to call the Minister of Gender. Makes the phone call that night and says, did you see the news last night? There's only one or two channels at the time. They all watch the news. Did you see the news? The guy, he's trying to get an appointment for his adoption. And because suddenly the next day I have my appointment. So I'm sitting there now in anticipation, figuring that Dr. Miragande had pulled some strings or made some calls to say, you've got to have this appointment. What are you doing? The guy's doing good for our country. So soon, within about 10 or 15 minutes, this giant door, I never forget, it wasn't just a regular office door. It looked like leather on it. It was kind of beautiful, but kind of awkward. It looked like pillowed leather, like a couch hanging as a door. So the door opens, and out walks the minister, the lady that I had been hoping to meet all this time. And we sit down, greet each other, and she says, I know why you're here. And she says, I am only now waiting on one more report. And if the report is good, I will sign the paper. And I said, well, when will you have the report? And she says, I'm expecting it any moment. I'm expecting it maybe by lunchtime today. Before that, we had some small talk. She had some photos of politicians and things from America. And there was a photo of her and President George W. Bush and some other politicians, because Bush had been there in that term to dedicate the new American embassy. So in trying to build rapport, she says she knows why I'm there. And so I'm going to get into small talk and try to build some relationship with her, since I don't know what she thinks of me. I don't know if she likes me. I don't know if she likes the lady up front told her about. I don't know. I need to make a friend. So I said, I see President Bush. She goes, oh, very nice man, President Bush. She says, do you know him? And I said, I've interviewed him on my radio show one time. She says, oh, you're friends. And I said, I'm not quite friends. I had him on the radio show. But in her mind, George W. Bush and I were now best friends, because I had him on my radio show. Actually, while he was running for president, he wasn't president yet. But nevertheless, in her mind, we're best friends. And she says, this is my photo. She proudly holds up her photo of her and Bush. And I said, I attended both inaugurations for President Bush. I said, do you know the inauguration? And she makes the motion. She raises her hand. She says, they raise a hand and a hand on Bible and become president. I said, yes, I attended both of those for President Bush. She says, oh, you're good friends with President Bush. And I'm like, I'm not sure I'm good friends. In her mind, it was a very intimate setting. Just President Bush was inaugurated to me only. Actually, there were thousands and thousands of people there, and thousands of people at the inaugural balls as well. So, but in her mind, it's building this rapport that I'm a guy that's I'm good contact for her, because she really liked President Bush. She says, again, I know why you're here. I'm waiting for the one report to come. And I said, the one report, when will that come? She says, hopefully anytime. I don't know what the report was, something about a final report from somebody that this child truly was abandoned and no biological relatives were known of, etc. I think that was the report. She wasn't real clear. And she says, come tomorrow at this time, and I will sign the paper. And I had a moment of craziness, a little moment of being gutsy. I knew how difficult it had been to get that one appointment. And the last thing I wanted to happen is her make me come back the next day, and maybe she gets called to the president's office, or maybe she has to go to a cabinet meeting, or maybe she has a change of heart. I have her going down the right path to sign the paper. She says, come tomorrow and I will sign the paper. And I said, it's time for the boy to go home. It's time for him to go to America. And she looked at me and I said, can I come to afternoon? This afternoon, I will come at 3:00 and I will take the paper. And she looked and I said, the boy needs to go home. He needs to have a family. He's in an orphanage. No more time in orphanage. We need to have it today. That's pretty gutsy on my part looking back at it, because she could have kicked me to the curb. She says, 3:00 today, I will see you. And with report, I will sign paper. So I leave. And I'm like, oh, goodness, now it's getting real. So I head out and we go to lunch, and I'm watching my clock, my watch, going, is it 3:00 yet? Is it 3:00 yet? Sure enough, at 3:00, I walk into her office. As she let me back in, Veronica glares at me again and begrudgingly opens the door for me to go in. And she says, I have received good report. The report is what I needed. And she signed this piece of paper and she handed it to me. And that started the process of being able to legally take my son from an orphanage. Now, that afternoon, it was starting to get dark by the time all the things, and I'm like, let's go get him now. And they said, you don't want to take the child out of an orphanage into a strange situation at nighttime. We will wait till morning and we'll go and pick him up the next day. Well, the bottom line is, yes, the next day we left the orphanage, and River began the journey home. We stayed in Rwanda for one more day doing some paperwork and getting some things in order. And then we flew to Ethiopia to process at a centralized embassy and ultimately made it to America. It wasn't too long before I actually went back to Rwanda. Let my son get settled in. I think it was 8 or 9 months. I'd actually have to look it up on the calendar. And I decided to go back. We had begun now a child sponsorship program where you could sponsor children in the orphanage and become a child sponsor, interact with them. And we had a little bit of success with that. But on that first trip back, I was informed and brought to a meeting, and they said, Rwanda is doing what they call the deinstitutionalization process. They're trying to get rid of institutions for children. They're trying to educate their people to have to adopt children into their home, not as like a houseboy or a servant, but adopt them into their home as part of the family. So they were trying to educate the people of Rwanda to do this. And because of, I guess, the attention that I and others had brought to this orphanage, it was going to be one of the pilot programs. And so I would go back and check in the kids in school, pay their school fees, and I was there the first or second time I was back, and they were trying to start finding adoptive homes. So we partnered with another organization and said this: I would pay the school fees, because a lot of people would want to bring a child in. Sometimes they could even find a biological relative of a child in the orphanage that they just couldn't afford to have another mouth at the table. Maybe it was a niece or a nephew, or a great niece or nephew, and somebody had died, and they get stuck with, they couldn't afford to have this, so they thought they'd have a better life in an orphanage. So sometimes they would find these families that were poor, say, we want the baby in our house, we want the child in our house. And so our organization, which had become River's Promise, agreed that if you were in that situation, we would pay the child's education, the school fees for that child, wherever they were at in their adoptive homes. We would pay those for about a year. And the other organization would go in and help that family learn how to make money, maybe teach them subsistence farming, maybe teach them how to grow crops better so they had enough to sell at the market. They would help. So we partnered with another organization, and ultimately led to the deinstitutionalization of pretty much the entire country, and the orphanage where my son was one of the first ones to be shut down. To this day, I still stay in touch with a lot of those kids. They've all found me on social media. Some of them are married. Some of them are orphans. John Paul's a kid that was 15 or 16 when River left. John Paul is now in his 30s, and he is a baby, and his wife. And he said, we are both orphans. We have no parents. His parents died. Her parents died. The baby, he says, so you are our father, and you are the baby's grandpa. And I said, I may look old and sound old, but I'm not yet a grandpa. Thank you. But that's the kind of relationship I've kept with all those kids through the years that we've taken care of. And we closed up the orphanage, and I'm kind of ready to give myself a pat on the back and go, oh, I guess we've done good here. My job is done. I've kept my promise. All of my son's earliest friends are now, for the most part, in good situations. I think it's good. Pat myself on the back. And I'm about to go to the airport one day, and Willie, my contact there, says, I want to show you something. I said, I have a flight to catch. He goes, your flight is not till 8 or 9 o'clock tonight. Let's go. He drives me about 45 minutes out of the city to an area that I now know is called Kamoni. It's a place where it's right off the main highway, this little village. And when we say village, it's not like Gilligan's Island where everybody has huts in a row. It's just an area, an enclave. It could be spread out for a few miles, but that's the local community, the neighborhood, if you want to call it that. It's a neighborhood. We call it a village. But I go there and down the highway, and then we park right off the highway, and we start hiking up this road that's dirt and potholes, and the car we were in wasn't going to make it. He gets stuck. And so we start walking and walking and walking. And I said, where are we going? He says, we're going to meet people. At the time, these people had been designated as, in the tribal era of Rwanda, let's just say that, the tribal era of Rwanda, they, if you know the genocide story, it was the Hutus' genocide of the Tutsis. And so you have the Hutu and Tutsis. Well, there was another tribe actually in the tribal era, and they were called the Twa. You would know them probably from social studies classes, pygmies. They would oftentimes say that pygmies are short, but there's tall pygmies. A lot of that's nutrition, a lot of it's genetics, but it's not like a community of little people. But a lot of that is genetics. Well, these were the people, the Twas, that had been designated. And even though Rwanda no longer recognized the tribal division, these people were pretty much the lowest of the low. They were some of the poorest of the poor, some of the most forgotten. They just kind of lived out in these neighborhoods on their own, this community. They're very poor. Children weren't going to school. And so as I was walking back, they told me of all of their lore and legend of passing down stories as they do, according to them, they'd seen a white person before. You can go out and see them on the highway, or they'll come, but no one had ever walked back up into some of into the areas. No one had ever walked the roads before. And they said, you're the first white guy that's ever done that. And we walked into this little kind of a lean-to, had banana leaves and scraps of dirt. And I said, why are we in here? It's just like, why are we here? They said, this is where one of the ladies lives. I said, see over there, there's a stack of banana leaves and like some ripped cloth that maybe it could be as a blanket. They said, that's where she lives. This is her house. She needs a home. I said, this isn't waterproof and we're in a tropical rainforest. They said, that's the problem. They told me statistically, and I don't know where they got it, that even out there, it was so remote and primitive that it was nothing to give birth to a child, and many of them would get cold and damp at the rainstorm, and it was nothing for a child to not live till the age of 3. I'm not sure where their stats came from, but all of them had stories of losing children at 1, 2 because of just simple common sickness. It was a pretty remote place. People weren't going to school. The kids, I actually saw kids that had little more than rags on. Some of the younger kids were just they had no clothes. It was one of the most devastating, crazy things I'd ever seen. And so I tool around, and they're amazed to see me, and I'm amazed to see them. And I keep saying, we've never had a white man up here. They're through the translator. They've never had a white man up here. And I'm walking around, and I'm just stunned by what I saw. And I get in the car. We're heading back to Kigali so I can pack up my hotel room and go home. I fly back to America. And I said, what are you doing, Willie? Why did you bring me here? He says, you need to pray. And I said, oh, no. I said, but I thought my work was done. He says, you pray about it. I said, okay, this is going to lead to trouble. And sure enough, I get to the hotel room. And even before I got to the hotel room, I said, okay, I'm the first white guy that's ever been out there to see this. And I likened it to this story that I say, if you're on a dirt rural road in the middle of nowhere, no matter how big of a hurry you're in to get to grandma's house or get home or whatever, if you see a car get T-boned by a freight train, you don't say, well, let's let the next guy deal with it. You stop in your hurry and you try to help wherever you can. You call emergency, you do whatever you can. And that's the analogy, if you will, that came to my head. You're the first dude on the road, and you have now witnessed the crash, and you got to do something. There's a song that Brooke Fraser did, and it's one of my favorites. She went to Rwanda, and she uses the phrase in the song, and you can find it on YouTube if you want to. Maybe we'll post the link up. In the phrase, she's talking about Rwanda and talking about a little girl she met there, and she said, "Now that I have seen, I am responsible." And that was my thought in the village. I said, okay, I've seen it. I guess I'm now responsible. All the years, here I am, little old Jimmy, and I'm the guy that has to see it all. So that's how we started out in the village. And really, transformation has happened out there. The kids all have clothes. They have shoes. We feed our kids that are in our sponsorship program and attend our school. They get 2 nutritious meals a day. We have kids that have finished trade school. We have kids that have learning to sew. We have boys that have become welders. We have boys becoming auto mechanics in trade school. We have a girl that graduated top of her class in high school, and we're actually, through her generosity of her sponsorship, sending her to nursing school. Let me tell you, we've come a long way since the days of me walking around and seeing kids with no shoes, barely any clothing on, and a woman sleeping on banana leaves. I think at last count, we have built a few dozen homes out there for widows. We've transformed the place, and that's what Rivers Promise is about. So we started just making a promise to my son that I'll take care of all your friends that you left behind. But in a sense, it's grown to where we'll just take care of all the kids that we are in Rwanda that did not have the luxury of coming to America, the luxury of prosperity, the luxury of education that we take so for granted. Decided that I would keep that promise to my son and take care of a heck of a lot of people. But if you ever wonder how we ended up out in this remote area outside of where River was not even from, it's because my friend took me there, and all I could think about was a freight train T-boning a car, and I knew I had to stop. Listen, the 2 most important days of a person's life, the day they're born, the day they figured out why. I never thought that I would do orphan work or widow work in Rwanda. That was not on my radar screen. I never thought I would be, in people's mind, a missionary to Rwanda or to Africa. That was someone else's job. I actually thought I'd be a lawyer. I thought I'd be a politician. Of course, many of you know I became a radio host and a media guy, but I always thought Africa was not even on my radar screen. It wasn't even on the bucket list to go to Africa. And yet God had a different plan. And listen, the 2 most important days of a person's life, the day they're born, the day they figured out why. I figured out I wasn't born to be the lawyer, wasn't born to be the politician. I was born to help widows and orphans. Listen, whatever it takes, find your why. Maybe your why may not be going to Africa and saving orphans and building houses for widows. Your why may not be to start a drug rehab center. Your why is not my why. My why is not your why. But we all have a why. Figure yours out. Maybe it's just to be the very best caretaker, mother, parent of your children or your grandchildren. Maybe your why can be very simple. It doesn't have to be complex. But know that you're put on the planet to do great things, and just do great things. And whatever door opens up in front of you, for me, some reason, the door opened up in Africa. I didn't see that one coming. I didn't sign up for this on career day. But listen, that's what my purpose was for. That's why God has me here, and I'll keep keeping the promise. Listen, whatever your why is, do whatever it is that you can. Do some good. Do some good today. This is your critical mission.